All right, so hello everyone and welcome back to the next episode of the Disclosure Podcast. I am your host, Ed, and this is a really exciting podcast that's been a long time in the making, literally like weeks and weeks of planning, but due to my slightly disorganized attempts at emailing, we couldn't get to it until now, but here we are. And so I'm really excited to say that Joanne McArthur is here on the podcast today. And before we get into the actual bulk of what we're going to talk about, just give you a little overview of some of the amazing work that Jo has done. So Jo is an award-winning photographer, author, and sought-after speaker. Through her long-term body of work, We Animals, she has been documenting our complex relationship with animals around the globe. Since 1998, her work has taken her to almost 60 countries, and in 2019, she founded We Animals Media. McArthur's first book, We Animals, was published in 2014 by Lantern Books. Her second book, Captive, was published by Lantern Books in 2017. And something I'm looking forward to hopefully talking about on the podcast is the 2013 documentary, The Ghosts in Our Machine, which was directed by Liz Marshall and followed Joanne McArthur as she went around documenting the plight of abused and exploited animals. And that, interestingly, was one of the first animal rights documentaries that I ever watched, and it affected me very profoundly. McArthur's photography and writing has been in publications such as the National Geographic, the National Geographic Traveler, the Washington Post, the Guardian, Vice, LA Times, Huffington Post. You get the picture. It's been widely broadcasted, widely shown around, widely published due to the incredibly impactful nature of the work. And not only has it been published in many publications, but Joanne McArthur has won several awards throughout her time, including recently a 2017 Wildlife Photographer of the Year in the People's Choice category. And this year you were highly commended for your image, The Wall of Shame, which was taken in Texas, which is actually, hello, Joanne McArthur. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. I appreciate it. And actually, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Wall of Shame image, if you wouldn't mind, which was highly commended this year in the incredibly prestigious award ceremony that took place this week. Is that right?
Yeah, 2 nights ago.
2 nights ago.
Yeah.
Wow. How are you feeling after that?
Tired. Yeah. Everything's been really great. And I guess that situates us here as well in London. That's why I'm here in part for that, and working on a project here at the Royal Geographical Society with my co-editor. But to that award, so that's an image of bloody handprints on a wall at a rattlesnake massacre called the Sweetwater Rattlesnake Roundup in Texas. And people are just astonished that this happens. Like the things that we conjure, the ideas that we have to, maim, injure, dominate, and that's what this picture is. So what you can do at the Rattlesnake Roundup is pay a couple extra bucks to skin a snake yourself. And so once your hands are bloodied, you can put your handprints on this wall. And what is striking about that image is that a lot of those handprints are children's handprints, and they sign their name next to it, little smiley face. And I'm very, very happy that an award of this size and also dedicated mostly to typically beautiful images of wildlife, they now have this photojournalism category where they're showing the reality of our current relationship with the natural world, which is one of domination and devastation. And George Monbiot describes this time right in history right now not as the sixth extinction, but as the first extermination. Wow, so accurate.
That's powerful. Yeah, I've not heard him say that. That's a very powerful notion, isn't it? I think what struck me about the photos you took in Texas during the rattlesnake roundup, I think, was just the normality of it, I suppose. I guess this is something you experience a lot in your work, is just the fact that these horrible acts of cruelty are normalized so much. And I think, like, living in London and the UK, like, obviously animal abuse is normalized, but it seems different in terms of that rattlesnake roundup. The sheer violence of getting children to skin snakes and abusing them and then being proud of that is startling.
I love that you mentioned this because the normalization, yes, but it's not often you get to actually document and witness the normalization. Animal use is just inherently around us in our world, and yet here I was surrounded by children who were repulsed by what they were seeing, by the violence, squeamish. It's murder and it's blood and it's gore, it's dripping everywhere. Like, it's really visceral. And so here were children repulsed to do it, and yet there were the parents, pushing them forward and a little pat on the back and people cheering, like, go ahead, kids as young as 4 years old, go ahead, you can do it. And then having them skin the animal and feeling proud and being applauded for this. And so we know that children, of course, are complex, but they have this innate compassion that they grow out of or is nurtured out of them. What's the opposite of nurtured?
That's a good question. Yeah.
It's like pulled out of them. It's
conditioned out of them.
Conditioned.
Potentially. Actually, you saying that reminds me, there was an image taken maybe a couple of years ago in England, and it was of a young boy, maybe 10 years old, and he was crying next to this sheep. And his mum had posted it online on her Instagram, saying it was a big proud moment for him because he'd raised this sheep himself, and now was the day that the sheep was going to be killed. And he was crying because he was so upset that he was going to lose his friend. And the caption was basically saying, this is the moment where he accepts the system and he accepts that this is the reality of the world. And I guess it's a similar thing of just children and they're not complicit, are they? They're forced into these environments, and then often they exhibit emotions and signs that they don't enjoy what's happening, and then we force them to accept it over time.
Yeah, I know there's so many children who also like this idea of vegetarianism or not eating animals, and yet they're not able to to enact that and to live that way because they are children and they're not making the rules.
Yeah, and if I'm right, you said that during the rattlesnake roundup, someone actually fainted was when the killing was taking place.
Yeah, a young woman fainted, and of course everyone was gentle with her and picked her up, and but people were laughing as well, and they're like, "Oh, poor thing, poor thing, she can't handle the violence." And
yeah, shock horror, right? Someone can't handle the violence. It's it's a scary, scary thing. I mean, I remember I was in Texas last year, and it's not to pick on Texas as being any worse than anywhere else.
Yes, correct.
But there is, and we did a rodeo protest, and I was kind of shocked by just the sheer enjoyment that people get from these actions, which I think. I think it's there. Obviously, we use animals in so many different ways, but I think it's sometimes when we do it for sport that I find the most disturbing because it seems so archaic. I mean, it's all archaic, of course, but you can, to a certain degree, you can rationalize. Oh, we need to eat. We need to blah blah. But with sport, it's just completely. Oh, I enjoy this. There's no other facade in place about it,
except maybe culture and tradition.
Yes.
Yeah.
The big ones,
looking at bullfighting, and Keith and I are editing images for our next book right now, and we don't even know where this picture was taken, but it's on men on horseback with a duck dangling from a rope between buildings, and they're going with a knife, and they stride across this plaza, and they cut the head off the duck. Like, what the hell? Like, what are we even looking at? We feel, honestly, Keith and I feel like I keep looking over there because he's couple of rooms down, but yeah, we feel like crazy people. And I guess, a lot of us activists and compassionate people feel crazy. It's a totally crazy world that we're existing in, and we look at others, in quotes, from a completely different lens. We see others, we see non-human animals, we see the use everywhere, and we go to the brutality, we bear witness, we take part in Extinction Rebellion, we make books, we do what we can, and we feel like islands sometimes, don't we?
I think anyone listening, I think we've all resonated with that thought before of just feeling like we were born into this weird planet where everything seems the wrong way around, where we're fighting for something that is so obviously wrong that it seems insane that we actually have to exert any amount of energy to convince people to stop doing this. It's alarming. Well, what inspired you to get into your field of work and into investigative photojournalism?
Well, it was the photography that came first. It's a fantastic tool. As I often say, for me anyway, it's an all-access pass into the lives of other people and places, and because I'm friendly, I'm often welcome places, and so I'm just really curious about the world. I started with street photography and humanitarian work, and it was. I want people to see the world the way I see it, and so it's a really exciting creative challenge to capture something and have it say what I want it to say. And thankfully, often it's stories of joy and redemption and the human spirit. But with the investigative work, it's certainly not. It's documenting what is and what should never again be. But it was maybe 20 years ago when I realized I could combine my passions, which was my passion for, or rather my concern for animals with taking pictures. And this whole category of animals that I photograph, these invisible animals, the ghosts in our machine, they're just so underrepresented in our lives and in the media. And so I knew I had lifelong work ahead of me, unfortunately, exposing how we use and abuse these animals. Use and abuse. I always say that, use and abuse, but like same thing, really.
Yeah, I say use and abuse as well. I think it is a powerful parallel to draw, the fact that they are the same in and of themselves, I suppose. And I guess when you started photographing, animal rights and situations of animal suffering, did you expect to uncover, I guess, as much as you did? And what I mean by that is, there's a lot of things that even as vegans and animal rights activists, we don't know happens. It's like what we just said about with the duck. Were you shocked at just the sheer level of exploitation that's permeated once you started looking into the different events and different situations?
Yeah, and it doesn't end. I'm waiting for to cross the end line. And then, I've made it. I've seen everything now. No more shocks. I mean, just to be awful. No, I mean, I remember finding out that we would eat octopus live, like put them in your mouth live and wriggling, things like that, and cooking fish and serving them while their hearts are still beating. And we just go to incredible lengths. And bear bile farming, when I found out about that, tapping their gallbladders for bile, which is used in traditional Chinese medicines, I was like, okay, well, in the beginning, I would voraciously research all these things that we do and then go to wherever these things were happening and fight my way in, sneak in, work with organizations and get access and get pictures. But I wish I had been a better photographer back then, because the images would have been more effective. But that's how it goes. Right?
Yeah, exactly. You always live and learn, right?
Yeah, and also I would race around taking pictures of everything and not spend the time getting them out into the world. So too often images were ending up on a hard drive. And so the way I work now is quite different. I shoot a lot less, but I spend a lot more time getting them out into the world and creating relationships with media and organizations, so that the work I do is for not for naught.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Have you found that since you started, I guess, media and organizations outside of animal rights, have they become more receptive to your work? And is it something that it's become easier to publish over time?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah. I think that's the short answer.
Yeah.
I remember saying, 10 years ago, all these doors are closed to me, but also my work wasn't as strong then. I'm a better photographer now, but the world is changing.
Yeah.
And that door is open just a sliver. And so it is a big responsibility for photographers and animal rights investigators and people who are picking up the camera to do a really good job with the camera. Because if the image is not technically sound, doesn't matter what the subject matter is. The media is going to say, well, it's not good, it's not compelling. So that's part of why I mentor a lot of people, is getting the quality of the work that we're doing up there. It's not enough to see something happening in front of your eyes and take a photo from the typical human vantage point, 5-6 feet up here from too far of a distance. We have to get down and get close. It's my number one advice for better pictures: get down and get close. And the more we do that, the more compelling the images will be, the more will get published.
And I think that's a really interesting, actually, idea, because I suppose with the proliferation of iPhones and people having access to cameras now, I think what I've seen sometimes is there's like an oversaturation of the same kind of image. And it's really important, if we want to break through that oversaturation, that, as you say, up close and personal, and making sure that we're shooting animals and shooting these situations in a way that is going to reach people beyond what they're used to seeing, I suppose.
Not only that, but I think we need to put our phones away a lot more when we are out taking part in things. Our instinct these days is to advertise to the world what we are seeing and doing. And that has its value, but we overdo it. Like you said, we're completely saturated with material and media. And, we're so often just putting our phones on, live feed and getting really shitty footage and shitty commentary. Like, just stop all that and bear witness. Be part of something. It's really driving me crazy with Extinction Rebellion and Animal Rebellion, is that, like, we're there to take part and to build community, and so put the phone away. Like, don't worry about what people are seeing on the other end of Facebook. And or if you're going to take your phone out, like take a second to compose and create something a little bit more meaningful with a little bit more lasting power. But of course, I probably sound like a snotty photographer. Right?
No, I agree with you. I know very little about photography, but one of the things that I agree with you in the sense of I think there needs to be a little bit more thought, and because we want to make content that people see and it shocks them, or at least it resonates with them. It gives them a message, and a picture can speak 1,000 words. That cliched saying, right? But it's so true. And if we can actually take time to take really impactful images, it doesn't matter where vigils, rebellions, wherever it is. There's a lot more power to that than just live streaming for half an hour, which no one's going to share, no one's going to watch, and then you've wasted an opportunity. It sounds like now I'm being a bit cruel, doesn't it? But I do think that it has to be a certain element of like thinking about things in a way that we're not doing so much anymore. We're just blindly putting our cameras around.
And this thing that we do that we believe is so important, bearing witness through the Save movement, and like go and bear witness and feel it, reflect on it, maybe take a picture, or find a picture online that's, been well composed, and get online and say something thoughtful and share a good picture. I think. Yeah. But this is getting into like our whole relationship with social media.
I know, it gets off tangent, doesn't it? One thing I was going to ask actually, and I think it somewhat is a nice little way out of that one, but it is I think often people, I find for me, when I'm bearing witness, sometimes I find the camera can be a safety zone for me. And if I'm looking at the animals or the situation through the lens, it can somewhat help me detach from what's happening. Do you ever find that with your work, that actually allowing you just to look at the composition of the image and the framing, does that allow you to somewhat detach from the brutality of what you're seeing?
Yes, but I would like to replace the word detach.
Okay, yeah.
I'm not sure what word to replace it with. If I can elaborate on that, I go to great distances worldwide to gain access to places to shoot things we need to see. And sometimes, we only have 5 minutes before we get a red alert and we have to leave. Sometimes you have 6 hours in a farm. Sometimes you have 5 minutes, and you're there to do the best possible job for the animals. I'm not there to deal with my feelings. I'm there for them, not for me. And so I have to be professional. Again, I could probably substitute that word with something else, but I have to do a good job. Yeah, and so that's the focus. I don't think it's a detachment. Yeah. Certainly, I'm very, very connected when I'm photographing animals, and I try. It's hard to explain. I try and make myself small. Animals are very used to us swaggering around and throwing around our loud voices and doing things to them. So when I'm in the presence of animals, I try and just stay very quiet and not too much overly like eye contacted with them. I try and follow their lead, even if that's not even possible if they're in trucks or something, but just doing my best to not alarm them, because we do alarm them. That's what we do. And trying to make them as comfortable as possible with me around, so that it's kind of a bit of a ramble, but
no, please.
We need to show the constructs they are in. We need to show the complexity of them, which is really difficult when you're working quickly. So how do you do that? I don't know. Stay out of the way while being right in the front of center of things, like right in front of them. I think it's something that takes practice, and I'm going to leave it at that. Because you can tell I'm kind of working through this and not finding the exact.
No, it's a challenging thing to put into words, of course. And I think, experience. When you've experienced these things, maybe you can't. It's difficult to find words to describe that. And I guess, and I felt maybe I should feel a little bit bad by saying about the camera, because actually the flip side to that would be if you're looking through the lens and you're focusing on what's in front of you, it very much could do the opposite of. And we won't use the word detach again, because I don't think that's the right word to use at all. But I guess it could actually put you more into what you're witnessing, because you are taking particular focus about what's in front of you. And so actually honing in on a specific point of the whole picture of what's in front of you, I can imagine would do the opposite of allowing you to be, in a safe zone. It probably puts you more in head's way of what's actually happening. So I think that's maybe I didn't word that in the way that I felt bad for wording it in that way afterwards, because I think it was, I feel like when I'm at vigils and I'm bearing witness and I'm doing that and I'm documenting, it's that part of me that says, I feel uncomfortable in this moment, so let me take the camera out, let me focus on that instead. But actually, in the situation where you're surrounded by that violence, getting the camera out probably puts you more inside of that violence.
It's a good way of putting it. I think we could probably spend some time working this out.
Sure, we
could write an essay.
Well, so let's talk about the Ghosts in Our Machine, the documentary that I mentioned at the beginning. And there's a little quote you say in that where you refer to yourself as a war photographer. And I think that's an incredibly powerful concept. And I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate on why you would refer to yourself as a war photographer.
In the photography world, I think a lot of war photographers would consider that awful and cheeky of me. And it's meant to be a little bit, I mean, it's meant to provoke people. Like, what do you mean she's a war photographer? She photographs animals. This is ridiculous. She's sneaking around factory farms. She's not a war photographer. So I want people to kind of come out of that with more questions than answers. War on animals, yes, definitely. That's definitely what's happening. The illegal length that I have to go to do this work is kind of unusual for people photographing animals. So yeah, just food for thought there.
Yeah, when I think of that phrase, it's like war is brutal and it's violent, and we're using that phrase to describe what's happening to animals. And so I think that it pretty much very succinctly emphasizes that what you're documenting is violent and brutal, in the same way that someone in a traditional battlefield would also use those adjectives to describe what they're seeing as well.
Well said. And I was really, I've always been very inspired by war photographers. Their drive to expose what needs seeing and understanding. And we're here at the RGS because I'm working with Keith Wilson, who's a very well-known and respected photo editor, and he's worked on many books. And so the book that we are co-editing now is, the working title is Animals in the Anthropocene, and it is inspired by a war photographer named James Noctway. And in '99, he produced a huge book called Inferno, and it is an unflinching look at famine, genocide, civil war, all things that we have created. And there's no happy endings at the end of this book. It's, like it's probably 5 or 6 pounds. Like, look at this. This is what we do. And I absolutely fell in love with his work and his vision and his idea for this book. It's a historical book. It's not something, you want to pick up on a Sunday morning on your coffee table and flip through for the 50th time. Right. It's a historical document, and it's a conversation. And I thought, someday I want to do that for animals. I want to create an unflinching historical document of what is, and images that just, don't have a place on social media, or they get blocked, or the media doesn't want to publish them. So that's what this book is about. And we have contributors, maybe 15 contributors now. So it's not my work. It's a global, global contributions. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
When will that be released, do you think? A little while away, or?
Well, we say a year from now,
okay.
But things, it depends on the designer's timing and like the printer's timing and stuff. So, but we're aiming for a year.
Excellent. And that's exciting. And there was a war photographer, I think, during the Vietnam War who exposed what happened during a massacre called the My Lai massacre. And that's what really changed people's perceptions on the Vietnam War, was these images that had been released. And so, again, war photography in all its different forms, whether that's traditional war or war on animals, I think it serves a huge purpose in showing people what's happening and we don't think about, and we don't want to think about, but through knowing, we actually have the incentive to change, but also the reason to change. I think it's powerful. But sorry, do you have something to add?
No. We'll go back to ghosts.
Go back to ghosts, exactly. And there was a question I was going to ask about that, but I'll hold off just for a second.
Sure.
I just wanted to know kind of like how it felt to you letting because obviously what you do, I suppose, is it's very it's not solitary. I'm sure you work with a team of people, but I guess having like another camera in there that puts you almost front and center in that case. How was that experience of maybe changing what you were used to in those environments?
Yeah, a lot of investigators stay anonymous, and I chose from the beginning not to do that because I knew I would do my best to speak for them as well as speak for them. I mean, that's so loaded, but I would do my best to use everything that I have to speak up for them, and not just the images. And I'm kind of a normal looking, middle-aged white woman, and, with you can have a certain audience from that, like they're like, oh, she's so normal. She doesn't look like, a crusty.
Crusty.
So, oh my gosh. Yeah. So I thought, okay, well, I'll be a face for the things that I want to talk about as well. And to your question, being filmed, I mean, I'd much rather just be on the other side of the camera. With Ghost, I mean, it was fine. It was fine. I mean, I really trust Liz Marshall's vision, and the filmmakers we were working with are very talented people. And Liz and I have a similar ethos about our ideology around animal treatment. And I knew that she would do a fantastic film. Now, what's different about the film now is that while it's still cinematic and beautiful and poignant, it doesn't represent me anymore. So I've changed so much. And so when I do Q&As, which I still do for this film, I often talk about that a little bit as well, and how I've changed and the world has changed, even in just these few years since it came out.
Well, let me ask you that question then. In what ways do you think that you've changed and the world's changed? And how long has it been? 6 years? I guess 7 years since you filmed, maybe? Or
exactly. Yeah, the filming was 2011, 2012,
really?
And it came out in 2013. Yeah, so a lot has changed, and I was still like leading with the activism when I would speak with editors, and I thought that I was trying not to do that, but it's clear that I was.
Right.
And that closes doors and not opens them. And I knew that then as well. But I mean, I of course strongly identify as an activist, but that's just the media world works differently, and that's an ongoing conversation. And
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Well, you had the images that you took in Thailand of the pig slaughterhouse or slaughterhouses where they were being clubbed. That was put in the Guardian, and I guess when you take these images to them, and you obviously they're aware that the reason you want this published is to challenge that notion of the normalization of animal violence. Do you ever find that the kind of like the brutality and the graphicness makes it kind of challenging for these editors and these publications to want to go ahead with, or are they kind of like becoming, I suppose, it's similar to what I asked you before, but with the graphicness, is it becoming more accepted that that's a part of what you're showing?
I think it's interesting that you asked about that story with The Guardian, because that took months to publish, because there was so much back and forth between the editors and so many images pulled at the last minute, and many internal discussions between them all about how the images were so beautiful and so horrible. And they ended up covering faces. They ended up pulling the most violent, poignant, beautiful images, and they went for more subtlety. They certainly got the story across, but then it was for me to put out the rest of the images. And The Guardian is a special case because they have this series called Animals Farmed, which is just brilliant. And the editor, B.B. van der Zee, is just a dream to work with, and I love that whole series. And so there is a very specific home for my work there. So I'm kind of lucky right now. And we continue to work together. But the series is doing well, and so I hope it inspires other media to do something similar. I mean, they have a big audience for this, so international media of all kinds should be like, oh, okay, look, no one wanted to look at this before, and it's changing now, so maybe we should do this too.
Yeah, it's bold. I think I was so impressed when they did it, and hopefully, I guess as you say, maybe like the Washington Post or other outlets will want to do something similar, and it would be good. In the Ghosts in Our Machine, you go a lot to fur farms, and you document what's happening in these fur farms. You go to several places, but you also go to sanctuaries as well. And you go to, I think it's Farm Sanctuary in the documentary, which is a wonderful place. And I think often people, as an activist, and I guess we always say it's really important to go to sanctuaries because it allows you to somewhat kind of like detach from everything, see what the world we want to create looks like, and then you can feel reinvigorated to go back out. I often find that when I'm there, I can't fit easy into that mindset because I see it as more of a reminder of what's happening. And I was interested to know, do you find that going to sanctuaries gives you like a break and like some headspace, or does it do the opposite? And I guess for me, by the opposite, I mean is like when you leave, the next time you see animals, it's almost harder because you're thinking about the individuals in the sanctuaries that you were just at.
Well, I'm only going to elaborate what you said. So I feel the same way.
Okay.
So, and you said it very well there. for me, it is a lovely pause. But, you know, when I'm giving a turkey a belly rub, and there's nothing for me sweeter than getting my fingers there in the right spot, and then they start preening themselves because they're happy. So they like preen your hand as well. As wonderful as that is for me and the turkey, it's like, yeah, there's just millions more who don't get this right, who have absolutely no autonomy and nothing good ahead of them. So it definitely invigorates me to continue to work hard. So it's a pause and a push.
Yeah.
Push. And that's good. That feels great.
Yeah, of course. Before we start chatting, we said that this next question about kind of like how you look after yourself and how you can kind of keep going, I suppose, would probably become a huge conversation in itself. And so you don't have to give I imagine there's 101 different things that you could say, but out of everyone, I suppose, that I've met, that I know, I can't think of anyone who's seen more non-human, or even in obviously human suffering in these places as well, but I can't imagine anyone who's seen more animal suffering than you have in the environments you've been in. And one of the things people say to me is like, oh, how do you go to these vigils? And I think, well, it's not really comparable, you know. And I think, well, I think about the things that you do and other investigators do. And so I guess out of maybe curiosity for the listeners, but also for myself, like, how do you go about the day? How do you then go into the world and not carry this intense kind of like misanthropic feelings? And how do you see the world after you've been to all these different places?
I have those misanthropic feelings, but nothing is one-sided for me. I have those feelings, but I also love people. I don't like us as a mass and what we do in mob mentalities and our blindness and our ignorance, our willful ignorance. And I mean, we're so problematic, but I really love people. So everything is kind of two-sided for me. As with coping, I mean, it is really a huge conversation. Everyone asks me about it. And sometimes I think that, I think I know that like my answer would be different from day to day, depending on how I'm feeling. It's also, the answer is, you know, it was a journey. When I started and I was newly exposed to all these things, I was more raw than I am now. And I did suffer from PTSD. I was diagnosed with PTSD, and I had therapy for that. And I found that I was waking up in the morning and the first thought in my mind would be a pig in a gestation crate. And I was like, oh, okay, this is not normal. This needs actual treatment. But I had tools along the way. And there's a book I always recommend called Aftershock by Patrice Jones. It's like the Bible for animal activists in terms of tips for self-care. So I mean, I have answers like that, but and then there are some answers that I want to be careful about because they apply to me. They don't apply for other people. And then I'm like, you know, being a therapist, giving bad advice as though like from a position of a therapist. And you know, for example, I could say, well, it's not about me, it's about them. Which so I'd rather concentrate on them instead of me and like put my feelings elsewhere. But that's not necessarily good advice. No. And, but I think where I've landed after all these years, I know where I've landed after all these years is that I just put one foot in front of the other every day and I do my best. And there are all sorts of feelings around that. And hope, you know, you can feel hopeless all the time. There are plenty of reasons to feel hopeless, frankly, but I don't concentrate on that. And I had to train myself to be that way. If you practice being hopeful every day, then you don't have to practice anymore. Then it kind of is like your outlook.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's where I'm at. I'm a fundamentally happy person. I'm so aware of the problems in the world, but I don't live there. I don't live there in my heart. I don't live there intellectually. I stay aware and then I'm like, well, what can I do? And for me, like action is catharsis. Yeah. And so it's like leads to workaholism sometimes, but people are like, you need a balanced life. But like, I love my imbalanced life of like a huge focus on the things I'm passionate about. I'm so lucky to be able to do this every day. And I don't want to squander a single minute, though I do. We all do sometimes, right?
Of course we do.
Yeah.
I think that was a great response. Really. Yeah. I think it's something that challenging for a lot of activists, I think, is how to deal with that imbalance. And I think there is this notion of like, actually, that's a really great point what you said at the end, with there is this notion of like, oh, well, there's like an imbalance. And it's like, well, if it's your passion, then actually that's the thing you should be prioritizing. And I think sometimes with activism and anyone who takes part in any way that they do, there's this idea that shouldn't be necessarily their main focus. And for some people, of course, maybe not. But I think we're in a situation where, and like myself, because I do full-time education and different vegan advocacy work, and so I'm incredibly grateful for that, because that is the passion. So it's not about an imbalance. In fact, the imbalance would be if we weren't doing this a lot, most of the time. And so I think that's a great point to make.
We might get some pushback on this. We'll see.
We'll see. Yeah, we'll see what people say. So, and actually, another thing that I think was really important that you mentioned right at the beginning is, we shouldn't see humans as being, this sounds almost counterintuitive, but we shouldn't see humans as being the problem, right? Like, not as individuals. As a species, we cause these problems, but on like kind of like a myopic individual level, we are, I think, good, and I see so much good in people, even though those who do bad. And I struggled a lot with misanthropy at the beginning, I think, where I was like, I really felt alien in this world, but actually now I don't feel that as much. And I think it's really helped to try and understand why these systems operate, rather than just simplifying it by saying, well, humans are bad. Now there's, as we said before, cultures and traditions and all these different things that take place, that kind of unconscious or behind the scenes that we don't think about, that drive us to do these things. And I think I think if we struggle as activists and we struggle to cope, and it's because we're placing too much blame, potentially, maybe not blame, we're placing too much, I guess, anger, maybe a frustration in the wrong places. That's, I don't know, maybe that helped me a little bit with that misanthropy at the beginning.
And also you found your way of dealing with the problems. Like, you have particular skills that you are employing in the world. And it's really great when we can really think about what those are, whether you're a neuroscientist or a lawyer or, an entrepreneur, figure out what you're really good at and combine that with your passion. And I think there's going to be more longevity in that, and less frustration, and more good feels, more feelings of progress when we're doing that. True.
And I think if we start to see others around us as the solution to the problem, as well as the causation of the problem, they're also the solution. I think that's good. Yeah. And one thing about the culture and tradition thing is, obviously you've been all around the world and you've seen so much of how culture and tradition dictates what people do. And so this is potentially a challenging question, but do you think that, because I can think about getting a vegan England, like in my head, I can see that happening, a vegan UK. Do you think that it's possible for the message of veganism to resonate in all these different cultures that exist around the world? And by the ones where it can be resonated currently, if you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think yes with time. Absolutely yes with time. But it's actually not really my focus. I focus on, what can I contribute here? I can contribute strong imagery and these things that I do. When I step back like that and look at big picture, my mind starts to explode a little bit. Like, maybe I should be more goal-oriented in that way. Okay, if I want a vegan Canada, what 10 things do I need to do in the photo world to,
The problem, I guess, is you set yourself up for a failure if you don't meet those goals, and you can feel like you've wasted time. And it is a tricky one. I struggle sometimes to think big picture in that way. It scares me when I do.
And yet everything changes and every system topples. And evolution is a fact. And this unsustainable way that we interact with the earth needs to end. We just are so comfortable in our current use of animals. People don't want to give that up. People think it's a deprivation. They're like, oh God, but I get to eat meat every day. I get to wear fur trim. And why would I give that up? It's so amazing. But it's not a giving up. It's a giving. It's not a deprivation. It's a joy to make those changes and do better for others. People just need to learn that.
They say that the only thing you give up by going vegan is animal cruelty. And
excellent.
It's nice, isn't it? I thought, damn, that's good. Because that's the thing, you don't give anything up, but you gain so much, even if it's just that sense of living by what you preach, because most of us don't preach that we want to see animals suffering, but that's what we partake in. So you don't give anything up. You're gaining so much. I think that's a message that needs to yeah, people need to hear as well. And so we've been talking for maybe about 50 minutes or so coming up to that point. And so I do really want to talk about We Animals Media at the end.
Oh, good.
I think you alluded to this kind of collaborative work that you're doing in your next, in the next book that's coming out. And is that kind of like, maybe talk about We Animals and how that kind of progressed into We Animals Media and what that means now.
Yeah, We Animals was my project for a long time. It was me and a camera out in the world, but it's always important for us to think, well, how can I do better? Every day, I'm doing this thing. How can I do it better the next day? And for me, my dream was to make We Animals into an organization that had lots of contributors. So lots of writers, filmmakers, photographers out there in the world doing this kind of specialization. Again, not wildlife, not pets, but like this kind of investigative work and stories of progress and change as well. And because our work is supported by all sorts of donors worldwide, and we get grants, and we are supported by the Open Philanthropy Project as well. They gave us a nice grant to build this machine that we have built now, and so We Animals is no longer just me. It's a team of us making team decisions about the stories we're going to tell. We have 7 full-time, part-time staff, and about a dozen contributors now that we're starting to work with. We're creating, films. We have our first feature film coming out about animal rights in Palestine.
Wow,
yeah.
Fantastic.
And then we're publishing this book, and we're just working with such talented people, including Alex Lockwood, who made the filmmaker, not the two prominent Alex Lockwoods here.
Yes,
yeah, so it's really exciting. It's basically just meant to amplify what I'm doing and what we're doing, and amplify the visibility of animals and the voices of animals.
Wonderful. That's wonderful.
Oh, and another thing I do have to say is, again, how to do better. Well, getting my images off of a hard drive and out into the world. So we built the We Animals Archive, which has about 12,000 videos and photos that are free to anyone helping animals.
I've used many of these images. Well, Luna and I have both used many.
Good.
It's a wonderful resource. So for any kind of like activism groups, if you're making flyers, or you need like tablecloths or go check out We Animals Archive, or if you're sharing images online or whatever it is, go on there and have a look through.
Yes.
And there is some, and all different. There's so many different categories there of different things: entertainment, food, clothing, testing, so much. And it's definitely worth making the most of that. And I was going to mention actually because that has been an invaluable tool in kind of my online advocacy, as well as kind of more, offline as well.
We're really proud of it. Because again, this is it's a different business model. A lot of photographers are like, I'm going to take pictures and then I will sell them. That's kind of typically how it goes, but this is all for animals. So how can we continue to do the best for animals? And we wouldn't be able to do it without the support of like donors and grants and stuff. And so it's great that people believe in us and they know we're sticking around, and they're like, okay, well, we'll donate $5 or $10 a month. And we know that, for example, the world is gaining access to this free archive as a result. Yeah, it's really exciting.
It is exciting.
Yeah.
It is. And I suppose as with We Animals Media, as that team continues to grow, there'll be more. It's just an abundance of this kind of, I suppose, footage now, as well as imagery, which is sorely needed in that kind of quality and in that way. And so long-term vision for We Animals Media is, you've got the team you want. Are you looking still to expand? Is there an endpoint that you can see, or is it just more?
Well, on a personal response to that is that part of me is hesitant to keep it growing, because I don't want to be in a position of director. Like I want to do what I'm best suited to do, which is probably storytelling and capturing images of what's going on in the world. Right now, I'm in a director position and learning to be a manager and learning all sorts of things that I really don't want to deal with. But we have an insanely talented team. And I think if I dropped dead tomorrow, actually the team would be totally smooth going without me. Right. And that's how I want things to be.
Yes.
And so if that can continue in that direction, and so far so good, then let's keep growing, right? And have the right people on the bus, so to speak. And so that the thing can continue to be smartly and strategically managed. And Excellent.
Cool. I think that was most of what I had really penned down to talk about?
I did want to mention something as part of this, as part of the growth and strategy and the number of emails I answer all the time with people saying, I want to do what you do, or how do you cope, or how do you investigate? We created a masterclass. So it's 8 episodes, a total of 2.5 hours, answering the questions that people ask me all the time. And so we have an episode on coping and an episode on gear. My dog, Banjo, makes several appearances. He's so handsome.
Excellent.
Very important.
Yes, absolutely.
He's like the comedic relief.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But yeah, just, I want lots of people out there in the world taking stunning images and poignant images. And so I hope people check that out.
And where did you say those masterclasses were again?
WeAnimalsMedia.org.
WeAnimalsMedia.org. Perfect.
It's right there.
And if people want to financially support, they can do so through the same website?
Yes, exactly.
That's great. And Ghost in Our Machine, is that on Amazon Prime, am I right, or not?
Just go to theghostinourmachine.com and click how to watch the film, and you'll have many different ways to watch it.
Perfect. And I do recommend doing that, definitely. And thank you so much for being on the podcast.
It was so nice to speak with you.
Yeah, it's long overdue.
Yeah.
So it was nice that we could finally make this happen, and you've been super busy in your time here in London, so I'm grateful that you could take some time out of your schedule to come and meet me, and for inviting me to the Royal Geographic Society, which is a nice trip in itself.
We're so posh here.
Yeah, I know. People are going to be watching thinking, wow, my goodness, Ed's upgraded from this little studio we used to have. But this is not going to be a regular feature, but it is nice to be here for this little cameo.
It is a pleasure.
Yeah, it's lovely. Yeah. Well, I leave you to get back to the work that you're doing. I know that you and Keith are doing some challenging but important work right now, so I won't take any more time out of your day, but thank you so much for coming to talk to me, and thank you for everything that you do. I really, really appreciate it.
So great to meet you. Keep up the good work.
I will try my best.
Yeah. And, wouldn't it be great if we could work together sometime?
I'd love that.
I'm not sure what form that would take, but it would be really cool.
I would really love that. That would be amazing. Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for listening, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this latest episode, and you found it insightful. And please do go check out all the links that we just talked about. It's really wonderful. And do go check out Joanne McArthur's amazing work. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.